the swing. They've got video capture now. But I've got the new app loaded up. You can see there's a couple of new features or a new look to it all. So we're going to roll some putts and go through some data. Got my T-squared putter all lined up. Boy, does this thing ever look good. Oh. I have my Foresight quad going at the same time, so I'm taking a look at some data, doing a little bit of the comparison. So I'm working on a couple things in my putting stroke, and I'm going to go through all of that personal stuff in my head, and I'm going to go through what it is that I'm looking at when it comes to the Capto data. I'm going to kind of show you my train of thought here in a sec. It's one of the things that coaches always ask me for, what do you navigate? How do you look at stuff? Like, what's your first thing? And to be honest, I look at something different every time, depending on what I'm seeing in the stroke, depending on, what sticks out as red versus yellow, versus what's green. So there's trends to see. So lots of putts, seeing what's going on a consistent basis. And then from there, I just choose my own adventure. A little bit harder. Okay, so one more, and we're going to take a look at the data. Cool. So through this screen, we're going to try and navigate, like I said, some different things that we're looking at here. And I'm going to blow it up a little bit because we really don't need to see me anymore. So when we're looking at this, when I'm looking through these putts, I think I rolled 3 putts that picked up. When I go through this, I can see through all the color codes that nothing's really out of sync or out of whack. Nothing really stands out as, oh my gosh, I really need to check that. The only thing so far is, well, I had a 2-degree change in club face from where I started it to where it returned to, and the putt kernel was yellow. But other than that, the way that I look at this, the way that I would diagnose or dissect a putting stroke through this is to first obviously evaluate color, but then take a look at what the pattern is. So I look at the angles to path and arc. And I can see here the face to path is a little bit open, a little bit of a cut pattern. And the shaft to arc, or the amount of loft delivered along the path, is low, is reduced by a degree. Now, those two things still show up in green, so there's still, the windows or the possibilities are still okay. You can see that I really do float along this green line of 0, right? The ultimate face to path is going to be a 0, and we can see here that it gets a little bit on the de-lofted side early, right? We can see that it gets a little bit closed through here and then maybe a little bit open through there and then comes back open. So the inversion point, change in direction point versus impact, we can see that it has a pattern to it. We look at the shaft to the arc, we can see here that we do live in that de-lofted world a little long, and then it goes into the lofted world after the ball's been hit, which doesn't really matter, but it's something to look at. When we go through these patterns, we can see some of them are going to start to look somewhat similar. When we look at the face-to-path relationships, we can start to see that it's going to be similar most often. Again, this is pattern stuff that we're talking about. These are trends. These are things that you always do. So going back to that putt that I looked at, we had a change in club face angle of about 2 degrees, meaning that the system thought that I aimed it square, and I returned the club face back open to where I aimed it. Now that ball pretty much took off on my start line. It was a good putt, so there's a good chance that I had that putter face maybe aimed a little bit left or closed its setup, bringing it back to square. So one of the things that I have to look at is making sure the club face stays fairly square. At setup. When we look at the loft, we can see that dynamically we've added about 3 degrees of loft throughout the motion, right? Just a little bit of loft adding just after transition. We can see that the arc of the putt, We do hit, the ball does hit up on it. The low point in purple here is below or behind the strike point. And the things that I really like to look at, because it gives me an idea of how the ball is launching, even though Capto's not measuring it, is the launch angle. Is the ball launching in the right direction? So we can see that the launch direction relative to the target line, well, that ball was pushed 2 degrees, about the same amount the face was open. Now, that's going to be relative to where it started as well. Now, when I look at the launch direction relative to the vertical, we brought in 3 degrees of dynamic loft, which is about what I have on my putter. And the arc through impact was about 1 degree up. And if we take 90% of the 90% of the 2.7 plus 10% of this 1, we end up with 2.5 of a predicted launch height. And that's a pretty good launch height. That tells me that that ball's going to launch up out of the hole a little bit and get rolling fairly early or fairly strong. So that's something that I really like to look at when I'm looking at how the ball is launching off the putter. We can look at the energy. Energy is an awesome thing to look at. Now, this is really neat how they've changed the image of this to show you all this turning around. We got our impulse vector. That's a new one. So we have the torque on the putter. We had an energy loss of 3.1% because the ball was hit off the toe. Pretty good. A toe slightly, so that was close to the center. Dynamic loft 2.7. All of these things are looking pretty strong to being able to minimize how much energy I've lost when the club hits the ball. Again, 3 degrees of, or 3% lost energy. And the face and the track, the face to track or the face to path relationship was fairly square, and the cut energy loss was only 0.1%. So that was pretty solid. Very solid putt with an energy loss of 0.6 or 6%. Now, within Capto, there is a chance that you could deliver a loft, dynamic loft, to the arc relationship so that it produces a positive energy gain. That's a potential. But most of the time when we see that, that ball's launching negatively into the ground, so it has a negative launch angle, and the ball would bounce off the ground, resulting in its roll a little bit later. So we do have the 3D motion section of the whole thing. No, that's what I was looking at earlier. We break it right down to, well, here's the last putt stance, and we can see the representing the shaft plane, which is just the plane, or the plane, the shaft swings along. And then we have our putt plane and our putt direction. The green is a little bit more of the center of rotation of what it is that we're doing. And I think that those two lining up produce a pretty good result most often. The only thing that we're looking for is to avoid too much of one of them shifting. The yellow one doesn't shift because it is what it is, but the green one can shift depending on how the putter is manipulated to either square things up or to release things through. So we had a bit too much of manipulation or too much of a plane shifting through that one there. Within all of this, let's see what else we've put together. We've got the preferred plane, the preferred plane of everything going on in purple, meaning this would be an ideal situation for where the putt plane could have started and continued. Notice how it's a little bit closer to the yellow. But the putt plane, the putt direction, these are things, again, are going to be different for every golfer. There's going to be great golfers that have the putt plane a little lower and great golfers that have it a little higher, depending on their mechanics. What we're looking to do is trying to keep things on the trend consistent and to try and match some things up in terms of where the yellow is relative to the green. Now, this is one that I really like, and I'm really happy that things have updated here. This here would be the acceleration and the speed profile of the stroke. So if we started with the sweet spot speed, we can see that the sweet spot speed goes from 0. Obviously, it starts at nothing. It gains some momentum. It slows. It starts to slow down as it changes into transition. Right, at transition point, it changes direction, so the speed gets to 0. That's important to know. Speed gets to 0. And then as it approaches the low point into impact, it gets fairly consistent. So it maintains a steady speed, which is ideal. A steady speed is important. We can see that we have, that's the sweet spot. We have the sweet spot acceleration graph as well, how the sweet spot is going to be accelerating through the stroke. Let's get back to a a couple of these. This is a bit of a different graph. Wow, things have really changed. That looks great. So the sweet spot acceleration is slightly different from the sweet spot speed. We can see that the sweet spot speed would have been 0 in transition, where the sweet spot acceleration would be the highest. Now that's at the bottom of the club. We also have the hand speed, being able to measure the speed of the hands going backwards, slowing down to change direction, and moving in toward impact. And we wouldn't want the hands to be accelerating too much into impact, just like we wouldn't want the speed to be accelerating into impact. So we have the hands acceleration graph here, which is fairly good. We notice that it's a 0.82, which is a fairly good shape quality. We can go back to the last putt that I hit was a 0.89. We can see that most often the acceleration of the hands at the top of the club is going to be somewhat of a consistent pattern. It's how it is we move the hands, how we move the grip, what we put into the grip completely affects how the shaft moves, not only back and forth, up and down, but twist, and it also affects the club face. So, whoops, I didn't mean to click out. All of the changes here, the 4 different graphs that we're able to look at, really do shed some insight into what's going on, into what the player is doing to the golf club. And when you start to get deep into those, you can break it back down into the face and path relationships. The handling and the trembling. So the handling is a little bit about what the golfer's doing to the grip from a back and forth perspective. And obviously the back and forth perspective would have a motion away from the golf ball. It would slow itself down toward transition and move in toward the golf ball toward impact. So that's the typical line that we would see. If we get into a trembling position, a trembling is more of an, like it looks here, more of an up-down, left-right pushing motion. We can see that there's not a whole lot really going on in terms of messing up with the flow of the club going from one direction to the other. If we do take a look at the handling being, if we look at it over here, handling being the twist of the putter. My mistake in terms of calling it the direction the putter's moving. It's not the force, it's the torque. So the putter does torque itself open, turns direction, goes in the other direction, where the trembling has a little bit of a push-pull up and down to it. So we're able to see what that golfer's doing to the grip and how that affects the putter. So from the sweet spot and the handle acceleration speed profiles to the handling, the trembling, being able to evaluate the loft, and just seeing some really great visuals in terms of what we're able to see, what we're able to provide in terms of a visual aspect of how the putter is moving and some numerical data along the way. I think that we can really get into a new idea or a different idea in terms of what the putter is doing, how it's swinging, and what we can do to make some changes into its fixes. So that's been a little bit of an update to what Capto's done to the visual aspects of the app. Going through some of the things we can see, we still have the custom tab to show for. We actually have one to show all the values. We can put as many values as we want in there as well. Green represents a live version of it. It's a little bit more of, what are things doing while you're moving it. We have some target stuff, target orientation things as well. The practice mode is something that I haven't used personally, but now that I'm going to start working on certain distance control, I want to start seeing my dispersion pattern. So using the practice version of this is a wonderful place to see where it is you normally leave your golf balls. And then we get into, again, a different live version, something that's going to be able just to show us what we're doing in real time. So if you're making a change to the stroke, whether it's a feel in a pressure into the hands or a twisting of the stroke, something along those lines, those things can get adjusted a little bit with the live version. So those are some things right off the bat with regards to a quick overview of the new update. I'm going to do some stuff with my iPad with regards to the video capture so I can get